All right, I'm getting a lot of glare today on the computer monitor, but the lighting is really good in here, so I'm just going to have to sacrifice a little glare for accurate lighting on this painting. And I did my corrections last week at the last part of the session, shortening the hand, shortening the elbow from here to there, bringing her jawline in from back here, and shortening this arm. So I can start with confidence knowing that I've gotten most of the problems worked out. My goal today is finishing, and the paint is pretty well dry. I can feel that there may be some wet paint under the surface. You can see there's a tiny bit of blue on my fingers, but it's pretty much almost dry to the touch. So I can go and put a tiny bit of medium over the surface just to kind of re-wet things. And that's the first thing I'm going to do is just put a light glaze. And I've got the 3 images up here because I'm looking at all of them really, just trying to make a decision for color. And I really like this blue-green color. However, I can't see it over here. This is could be bumped up just a little, and I could use that one. So I'm going to lean with maybe a little bit of Viridian because I think that's really pretty. I'll do a little bit of work on the eye because it started tacking up and lifting on me last week. So I want to work on her features a little bit, but I still want to leave those pretty soft. And I'm going to work on the clothing today. So I may put a tiny bit of ultramarine blue in with my glaze on the clothing area. Maybe just a little bit of Viridian. I have it out, or phthalo green. Just to give it a little oomph. There we go. Just to kind of wet it all over. And it is kind of still wet, so I'm going to have to do that really carefully with a really soft brush. See, that's really making it pretty turquoise. I'm going to keep it really thin. My medium is pretty thin. It's a lot more dry up here on the top. It's a little bit more sticky. Anywhere that's heavier, I'll have to be careful and not push too hard on. So I squeezed out some sap green because I think I'm probably going to stay more in this area, but I'll go ahead and glaze a little bit of sap green in here. It was a little wet in this area, so I'm being a little bit more careful. And down here, the light areas seem to be a little bit wet. The medium just helps kind of wet the surface so that as I paint back into it, it feels a little more like working wet into wet. You can see that anywhere the area had some light on it was a little bit wet still. And it wouldn't hurt to just glaze over her face too. Oops, a little bit of wet paint right there. Don't you love it when I say oops? We usually have lots of those. So glazing is just kind of just the right consistency of paint and medium. And this is my pile for sap green. That is my pile there for Viridian with a little ultramarine in it. But it's a little bit too bright. So I'm just using the sap green. And I have a little bottle cap here with the medium in it. If it gets too thin, it's drippy. If it's too thick, it tends to cover too much. So there's just a in-between consistency you want to look for. And I have to turn this at an angle, so the video may be a little bit skewed. But I can see where it's kind of wet. So you want to proceed cautiously with this. The weather is really snowy and cold here. It's been in the teens for a week or so. So paint is not drying well. It's staying wet. And I just want to kind of wet the surface And again, not too much color over the skin, but maybe a little. See that around her chin a little. I see some shadow here. Glazing is a nice way to get some cool tones in there without direct painting. Now, if it feels streaky at all to you, you can get a mop brush and just barely, the mop kind of acts like a wick. And if it's too drippy or streaky to you, just take a mop and kind of clean it up a little bit with the mop. Wipe it regularly with a paper towel. I don't want to leave those streaks in there. And I've got green around the gills here where I don't necessarily want it. You'll see it's real easy to take that off. But putting that green everywhere just kind of ties everything together. Remember to lay your mop brush down so you'll remember to clean it, because if you let paint dry in the mops, it totally ruins them. You can't get it out. Maybe Murphy's oil, but I'd be really careful with that. So I still have my mixtures here for a couple weeks now. They're still wet in the box with the clove oil in it. And because I'm working back into semi-dry paint, I'm going to stick with these softer type sable brushes, not anything too broom-like. This one's got some brush cleaner in it. Remember, I always swish my brushes before I start working because they have that orange hand cleaner, just to make sure I don't have any of that cleaner left in them. I don't know what that'll do with the paint, so I just don't take a chance on it. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to lift a little bit of this green off because I've got a clean brush here. I've got too much green on her face. A little bit too much on her hand right there. I didn't really want that. I'm going to go ahead and start on the clothing because that's my focus today. I want to fix the face, but I'm going to go ahead with as larger brushes I can make myself use and start with the darkest darks. I'm going to use a little bit of medium, ultramarine blue, a little sap green. And I want to brown that up because what I see here, it's got a warmer tint in some places. Here is much cooler with more ultramarine blue and phthalo maybe, but I'm going to put a tiny bit of the quinacridone red in it just to brown it up. All right, I'm going to start with my darkest darks because that is just a good rule of thumb. Go ahead and lay those in and establish those darks. I've got some on here already from last week where I redrew. That one comes in around her waist, her wrist, sorry. And I didn't mix a big pile of paint here, but I want it to be dark enough to define these shapes here. And again, I'm using a big filbert. I'm using the side of the filbert. Oops, too much red. And because the medium is on there, it's diluting it a little bit. Dark area right there. You may have to, if it feels wet, you may have to lay the brush. The way you hold the brush is important because you can kind of barely drag it along the top and lay some dark color on there that doesn't get eaten up by the medium that's on there, or any wet paint. It may be kind of wet in that area. I'm getting a little bit too brown. I want to go back to my blue and green in this mixture, not so much red. It is all very cool. And it leans, in both pictures, it leans a little more to the blue, green. This one is very purple, but again, you see the three different. Make a decision on which one you like and then just try to stick with the one. I have them all up here because it kind of helps me see different things, but don't let yourself get too confused and do too many different things here. It needs to be consistent. Now, I'm moving around quite a bit, but I've lost the definition to her sleeve here. And I like how blue it is in contrast to the greenish color. So and that's the underplane, so it should be pretty dark. I got up into the face a little bit there. I like that being separate. You can tell it's her dress, and this whole thing over the top is a scarf or some kind of a cape. This dark color goes all the way up there, and see, I just messed her nose up. So easy to do that, which is why it's better to go ahead and do this first before I start working on the face, because I can come back in there and correct the face. Get a little smaller clean brush. I was happy with that nose, so I don't want to lose that. Beauty of working back into dry paint. It's a lot warmer in this area where her hair is, so I want to keep that warm. I'm using a little bit of a brownish mixture I've got here with some burnt sienna and blue. And then it gets really dark. The burnt umber, which is pretty much dry. Your earth colors will dry quickly with a little bit of, I'll have to squeeze some more out. Notice how these darks tend to sink in after the painting dries. So you have to go back in there and restate them sometimes several times to get them to stay dark enough for you. Even after you put medium over the top of them, they still tend to be pretty, they still tend to get lightened up. There's a little bit of her hair on that side as well. Looks like it comes down in here. Maybe a little bit of it over here. And I'll soften that out with a flat liner brush. I'm going to get some really dark here with the burnt umber and ultramarine blue to draw some of this in. If I can get it dark enough. Ultramarine blue and the color of her hair. I always just think of what is there. The dark blue sleeve and her hair, which is burnt umber. So I'm mixing the two of those together. And then I'll take a softening brush. I'm moving back to my darks again, which is sap green, ultramarine blue, a little bit of burnt umber to get it dark enough. And I want to put these darks for the folds back in. And I'm being kind of careful to lay those in accurately. Her wrist, if you were to follow this rhythm of her wrist, it kind of goes up and around like that. And it's important because that defines her wrist right there. Comes down. And there's some other stuff going on here as well. So laying it into the medium like that makes it a little bit easier There's some dark purplish up here. And then the folds around her wrist. Because of the medium, it's making it dilute a little more than I want it to. So, get rid of that red. There's no red in there. All right, I'm going to move over here to the back here. Let's see. Let's get, this is more like here. And then this one goes down underneath. I'll have to correct that. And then this one. And they all come up to this point here. So it's kind of looking like a mess right now, and that's all right. We'll fix it. That's what you need to tell yourself constantly throughout this process. I'll fix it. Just get darks in, even if they're not exactly the right darks, and try to get the paint, try to get things covered here. I'm going to do the same thing over here on the scarf, and it's pretty brown over here, so I'm going to add some more reds. And they all have a flow like this. Probably. Down here. And see how it glides with that medium on. It's lifting some of the light off though, so I'll have to be careful. And just continue working around until you get all these darks back in. A little bit of the drawing of these folds in place. Of course, every time I record, there's a train whistle. That's just part of the ambiance, I guess. All right, so here, you know, you want to ask yourself, do I get every fold exactly right? No. I mean, you've got to add some of your own touch here. You can't get everything exactly right, nor do you really want to. But you want to. So I didn't clean my palette off this time because I had wet paint I'm using from last time. I've mixed ultramarine blue and white with a little green in it, lightened with white down that way. And this side is ultramarine blue with some sap green and a little bit of this mixture that has the Rossian in it. And I pulled it down to make myself several values. So this will be the mid-tone, and these will be the light areas when I start laying the folds of fabric in. So go ahead and make yourself a pile and make a decision, again, on which of these 3 or 4 different versions you want to use, and then go ahead and start laying your mid-tones and light tones in. A lot of times I'll put the shadows in on the arms along the length of the arm, and then the mid-tones and then the lights, and then affecting it around the surface of the arm to create some form and dimension. And your color might start to get a little muddy here, but just try to ask yourself, am I in the darks, the mediums, or the lights? Where am I? And try to dip your brush. Try to have distinct piles and dip your brush in the right pile. Stay in the mid-tones if you can. If you're working in acrylic and it's drying really fast, and I know you might have to work a little differently, and just work in one area while it's still wet. But either way, it might help you to have 3 brushes, one for darks, one for mid-tones, and one for lights. All right, so that feels pretty good as far as where the mid-tones go. I've worked from darks into these mid-tones. Now I'm going to switch brushes. This one's a little bit smaller. So I think I'll find a bigger brush here. I don't want to get too small because then I end up piddling around. And I'm going to scoop up some of this light. And I'm asking myself, what color is the light? Is it bluish? Is it greenish? In some areas it's purplish on the top of this shoulder. And I am putting that in against the grain of the arm or against the length of the arm. I want to add a little bit of that quinacridone red or whatever primary red you're using to make a little bit of a purple. So you're asking yourself how light or dark it is and how warm or cool it is. And that depends on what it's sitting next to. If it's purplish right here, well, next to this skin tone, it's very cool. But next to this really blue of her hood, it's warmer. So it all depends on what you're comparing it to. That's why it's so important to get the canvas covered and to have something on here to relate to. It's values that relate to each other, and it's colors that relate to each other. Or temperatures. Is it warm? Is it cooler than what's beside it? And that's too purple and a little too dark. So squint your eyes to see the value so that you're not looking at the detail so much, but you're looking at the lights, mediums, and darks. I like this color. It's a little brighter than what I see, but I like it. Don't get too light. Remember, there's no pure white anywhere on this painting. And here's where it gets tricky. It's like painting petals when you're doing folds, trying to figure out which one you're on, how many there are. Here's that big dark shape here, and it comes down. This, don't worry if it's exact. It's bluish here by her elbow. It's purplish as it goes up the sash. So that's all you really have to ask yourself, because you're in the light mode. You're in the light pile. Bluish here. Purplish as you move up here. Over here, it's a bit purpler. It's warmer purple here and a little bit cooler as it moves down. And you'll find that since you've put medium all over this, that it moves around a lot better for you. It's not so stiff as trying to drag a brush across dry paint. That's what made me want to quit when I first started working in oils. It was so hard to work back into dry paint. Everything was just fixed and it wouldn't move. All right, up above her arm is very purple or lavender. Which looks really nice with the green, mixed in with the green. On the top of her scarf is purple. Just here on the very top. Then it gets bluer as it moves down. And then on the front of her hand, it's really purple. I'm just now seeing that. Right in this area. The back of her scarf is very bluish green. Right here. I already have that in. Right here at her wrist is pretty green. It's amazing how you can see all these different colors in a scarf that's probably, if you laid it out, it would look to be one color. All right, so it's really blocky at this point. And the next stage of blending will help you marry some of these values together and make them not look so separated. So I want to make sure I have, here's 1, 2, 3, and here's the big area of shadow. Let me go back to my dark brush. Pop that shadow back in like it's supposed to be. There we go. And remember, you can always come back and lighten, make things lighter, and you can go back in and darken areas as well. All right, you have to have enough paint at this stage to move it around, so make sure you've covered almost the entire surface of fabric, the darks, the midtones, and the lights, and make sure you put enough paint on there, because if you don't have paint on here, it's not going to move as you try to start blending. I'm using this number 2 Rosemary Mongoose brush, and I believe it's one of the synthetic ones. Maybe not. I have the red and green on these older ones, but it's pretty stiff as mongoose brushes go. So I'm going to test it out. It may be too stiff for what I want to do, but I just want to barely chip some of these blocks of value together so they're not so separate. And I'm using a paper towel. Every single time I blend, I'm wiping it off on the paper towel, so I'm not dragging color all over the place. But I'm trying to keep my dark, middle tone, and light distinct, because the worst thing you can do is just take a blending brush and just mash it all together. You'll lose all of your definition, all of form. And you want to think about wrapping around the wrist here as you're blending. You want to think about the form underneath the clothes. You don't want to just go crazy blending it without thinking about what's underneath. As if there were a round cylinder right here. You want to continue to wrap this paint around it. Now, see how I had light on my brush there, and when I moved into the dark, I contaminated some of my dark. So you may have to go back in and redraw that a couple of times. This line here next to her chin is too hard. So I still have these little tiny blending brushes out, and I use those pretty often. 2 or 3 different sizes of these, just to soften those edges, continually wiping them off so I'm not dragging too much paint around. I've got some blue on her chin there. See how easy it lifts off when the paint's dry. So that's why patience and doing this in stages works so much better. If you try to do it all in one sitting, if you're impatient, you just can't always do everything you want to do in one sitting. And actually this one's working a little bit better for these folds. Just look at the direction that the folds are wrapping and try to make yourself blend that way. So I'm going to move back. When you get down here back into the clothing, you want to move back to a bigger brush. These little tiny brushes are too small. And if you blend it all out, you can do it again. You can do it as many times as you need to. So this is good practice for trying to keep your values and not losing everything. Most of the world is in the middle tone. And when you look around, if you will just study the room you're in, usually you'll see a few whites and a few blacks, but everything else falls somewhere in between darkest dark and lightest light. And so it's the same way with paintings usually. For her, her face and arm are the lightest light. Her clothing are the mid-tone. And there's little pops, and clothing and grass and trees, all that is mid-tone. And then there's little pops of light and little pops of dark. And I can leave some of my brush work here. I don't have to totally blend everything out. But we've done fabric studies several times, and we learned kind of the anatomy of a fold. You know, it's a tubular. Usually they're tubular, or like an organ pipe, and so they're like wrapping around a cylinder. There's drop folds, there's diaper folds, there's spiral folds like these going around her wrist. And when you know a little bit more and you've looked at a fold, and you can see how usually there's a sharp edge on one side, like here's the sharp edge, and then it rolls this way. Here's the sharp edge, and it rolls that way. So you have to look at all those things. Along her scarf here, there's a sharp, there's really not a sharp edge on any side here, but you can see the cylinder of each little fold. So they're soft as the dark rolls up into light. So I'm a little bit more aggressive down here with this mongoose brush and just getting these to soften together, but leaving a light, somewhat of a light, medium, and dark for each fold. And I had this way too blue right here. It's almost as blue as her sleeve. And even if this all gets just sort of mushed together, that's okay. I can go back in and put some more highlights and some more darks back in. But it's a thin, this is a very thin, transparent fabric. So if it's too choppy, if you have big, bold brush strokes on it, it's not going to look as thin and wispy and transparent. I put a little bit of that Viridian. I had some mixed up here. This pretty color right here. And I know it's a little too bright, but sure is a pretty color. Put some down here. Just remember that everything up here on top, now this is bulging right here, I'll have to fix that, but everything up here on top will be lighter than what's down under her elbow, because that's all in shadow. You can ask yourself when you're working in a particular area, I'm trying to refine this shoulder a little bit. You can ask yourself what's the lightest light, which is right here on the ball of her shoulder joint. And then there's a light right here beneath the chin on her wrist. That's the lightest light on that area. There's a little bit of a light here as well. So everything else should be a bit darker than these areas. There's a little light right here. And I've got to fix that. It's sticking up too much. Just need some dark bluish gray, bluish greenish gray right underneath here. I think there's a little bit of skin showing under there as well. It's hard to tell. This little piece of a fold right here come straight down from her nose. It's about right there. And that helps. You know, when you find little anchor points like that, that'll help you correct any errors in your drawing. Yeah, I see that. And then there's another bigger one here, swirl. And then I think I have this too low. Sticking out too much now, but I can work it back in. Now I want to fix the width of this shoulder because it's looking awfully wide. From her wrist to the underarm is the same as the chin to the eyebrows. So from her wrist to her underarm. So right there is where this first dark piece should come. Right here. And since I got so much light on there, it's hard to get it to read. There we go. And then there's this little circular piece. Comes down like that. Okay. Then I'm missing these folds over the top of the shoulder, which help narrow the width of that shoulder, so I'm going to fix that as well. And I'm using all my darks when you're trying to make a dark, your darkest dark that would be close to a dark brown or almost black. I'm just using ultramarine blue, sap green, or your mixture of green and a little bit of burnt umber. And got this. 1, 2, 3. That helps. And note the purplish color on her, where her fingers would be. And note the direction. You can almost see a hint of her fingers through the scarf. And they'll look like a fork or something here for a minute, or a comb, but you can put them in and then take a blending brush and soften them down. That's 1, 2, 3 marks, and then this little curve. So 1, 2, 3. That's too light there. It's kind of drawing attention to the hand. I need to redraw the shape of it again. That's better. It's not exactly like I want it, but it looks a little bit better. So constantly ask yourself, am I moving forward with it? Am I starting to go backwards? Sometimes you might need to get up and take a break if you don't feel yourself moving forward with it. In these dark areas, just a reminder, make sure you don't have any horizontal strokes that are catching a glare. Just get your brush and soften those down, because once they dry, it'll always be reflective and you'll have a hard time with the reflections. Okay, I'm going to move back to the face and rest from the fabric for a little while. And I've got these 3 brushes back out. They're all 3. This is a Langnickel, a little flat. This is the Rosemary #1 Kolinsky Sable, and this is the small #2 Mongoose. And I'm not going to do a lot. I want to put a little bit of detail on her eye. I want to clean up the skin tones and define her fingers just a little bit. And my background is wet around the hand, so that'll give me a chance to soften that in. So I'm just going to zoom in right now so that you can kind of see where I'm working on the face and the features. So the first area, which is what I tried to get in last week, is really warm in both of my images. It's like a burnt sienna color. And now it's holding color. Last time it just pulled it off because the paint was wet. So I'm putting a tiny bit of ultramarine blue in it so it's not so orange, and that will just darken it a little bit. Burnt sienna is a transparent or semi-transparent color, as is ultramarine blue is transparent. And that's probably my most common mixture that I use in shadows. I mean, not all the time because there's no formula for what you see. You've always just got to use your judgment. And I'm looking at the angle because it's real important to get the angle of this eye right. Kind of preparing the socket before I start laying the eyeball in. Again, Sargent said when he worked on an eye, he prepared the socket as if he were going to just drop a poached egg right into the socket. It's a weird way to describe it, but too many times you get busy trying to define all the details on the eye before you've even made a place for the eye. I'm guilty of that. And remember the eye white, that's too light. What I just put down is too light, so I'm going darker. The eye white is a cool tone. You can barely just see a little bit of cool. Sometimes you'll see a skin tone reflected in the eye white. So you just have to ask yourself, does it feel cooler or warmer? Is it a combination of both? And there's a little bit of a lighter tone right there. Usually it's a little bit lighter right next to the iris. So you can put that in bigger than it will eventually be. And the eye color looks to me to be a bluish eye color. It's hard to tell. So I'm just going to put a stroke of blue right there where the iris goes. Again, I'm making it bigger than it will eventually be. And the way her eyes turned, it's going to be real easy to make this eye look funny and sort of cockeyed, because she's rolling it outward. There's a really dark lash line. The lash line is like an awning over the eye. It protects the eye, but it creates a shadow on the iris always, unless the light's coming from underneath. I'm laying in my wet paint, so this would be a good time for a mall stick. Once you get your whole canvas covered, you're going to have to watch laying in it. All right, I'm back to the burnt sienna and blue mixture for her lid, for her eyelid. And then there's a dark line that comes down just from the lash line. Her brows are pretty dark. And remember, they have a dark ridge that goes down towards the glabella. And then they have a cool greenish tone as they wrap over the brow ridge here. Wow, she's pretty sharp. Everything's pretty sharp. I'm gonna have to calm it down. There's green here beside her nose, the bridge of her nose. There's a little green here. There's that warm burnt sienna color on her eyelid. Not so much in the picture on the right, but in this zoomed in version, it's very warm right here. And then I'm going to go back to the white of the eye again and push it back up. This eye is about the size of, I don't know what, it's tiny. Maybe a hole in a piece of notebook paper. Smaller than that, about the half the size of a hole in a notebook paper. So give yourself credit when you're trying to paint something that small. Much easier to paint a big, huge eye than it is a little tiny eye. It's gonna have some stages that look pretty bad. You're gonna wanna quit, but don't, just keep going. Now that's really sharp, so I'm gonna find my little tiny blending brush. I'm gonna make sure it's clean. I don't know what color I used last on it. So I'm swishing it, drying it off really well, and then I'm going to come back in here and soften all this down. I can't stress to you enough how much these little brushes help, because when you put this paint on so dark and bold, it's kind of shocking and it looks bad. And hardly anything in life is that bold. Especially living things, they're soft and organic. There. That's better. See? You think you ruined it. The angle of the front of her eyeball, it's foreshortened. It goes this way. So hold your brush up and get an idea of how what the hands of the clock would be on for that. That's like 4 o'clock. And don't give her a unibrow, which is what I'm doing. There's some warmth up there on her forehead. All right, now I want to stop there for just a minute. I want to go back and put a little bit more skin tone on her face, because that's our focal point. So you don't want to neglect that too much. And I still have my skin tones mixed up. This is all pretty nice and clean. I don't want to mess that up too much. I want to clean this chin up a little bit. And so I'll just get to come back in here with this nice flesh tone that's still pretty wet. And it's pretty dry. This is scraping on this dry paint. Sometimes you can just drag some color over it. You don't really have to paint real thick and heavy. You can just barely scumble over the top. Just to clean it up a bit. As you get closer to the chin, it gets warmer on either of the samples here. It's very warm on her nose. I don't have enough warmth on the nose. Put a little bit more there. On the tip of her nose, there's some warmth. Up here, there's a little warmth. And I'm going to take that warm color and mix it in with the yellow to give me a better skin tone for right around in here. This has gotten a little too dark. I just want to barely scumble some color over there. A little bit there. A little bit here. There's some green right here above the highlight on her lip. Just a little bit. And then your raw sienna mixture with a little bit of this pretty red mixture that's quinacridone with a little bit of raw sienna in it. Makes a really nice skin tone. There's a separation of her nostril there that I don't have. And I'm just going to get a little bit of the burnt sienna and blue mixture to kind of draw that in. Don't really have her nostril defined very well. There. Too sharp, but you can come back in with the blending brush and soften that down. And then this area of her mouth is very dark. I don't know if the paint has just darkened over time or if it's really that dark. I don't have quite enough of the lower lip, but you can see the lower lip is just, it's lighter. The upper lip's usually in shadow. The lower lip is just a little comma right here. A little tiny comma. Now that looks funny. But that's a good color for it. She got duck lips now. A little bit of light here on her chin. A little bit of light here. Tiny bit. It's a warmer light up here on her eyebrow, next to her eyebrow. A little bit on her lid. Tiny bit here. Now, softening it in. I'm going to put a little bit of dark to get this curve back in her upper lip. And the top of her lip comes straight down from her pupil. So it's in the right place, it's just sticking out a bit too much. That's better. And I'm going to go ahead, I have a little bit of black, ivory black, or I have a tube of ivory black. I'm just going to stick my brush in the tip of it and put a tiny, before I do that, I want to put a little bit more blue on her eye. And that would almost be okay not to do it, not to really worry too much about a big dark pupil, but let me go ahead and try it. Back to this little tiny softening brush. So you see there wasn't a whole lot that needed to be done to the face. Her eye's a little bit too sharp now. So I'm going to tone it down just a little so it's not standing out so much. And the light comes up really all the way to the edge of her eye on both images. So I'm going to put that back in. It's really pretty. It comes all the way up here. All right, soften in these little areas. It's pushing the paint around too. And you put it in and then you let it melt and push these little pieces of light and dark back around, make them. There's a little bit of warmth on her neck that I don't have, and that's the raw sienna color. I've got blue on my brush, so be sure you clean your brushes. It's raw sienna, mostly just raw sienna. And I can just drag a little bit over that greenish tone that's there. And remember this, there's an angle right here on her jaw. It goes this way, which is to like 11:30. And then this one goes down to about 6:45 or something. So those things are important. Get that in, get the right angle in. So I step back a little bit and I have her eye way too dark, but I can still work that in, soften it while it's wet. So don't forget to get back. And again, I fixed the jawline right here down and then over. And then a little of the sleeve comes up over her chin. So I can bring that back in with some blue right here. All right, and so I'm looking at the length from the bottom of her eye to the bottom of this shadow. And it's about the width of her eye. So I'm going to shorten it a little bit on mine. It feels kind of harsh. The light comes up even with her lid. And you don't see much separation here between the brow and the shadow under the brow ridge. So if that's too dark, she'll look mean. And I think one of the things that might be bothering me a little is this strand of hair. So I'm going to soften that out. It looks like the eyebrow is extending all the way over. All right, real quickly, I'm going to work on her arm just a bit, and then I'm going to be done. Finish this up later. There's a lot of warmth on her elbow. So I want to be sure to get that in. It's even redder than that.